Many countries of the world have been hard hit by the crisis, but the countries of sub-Saharan Africa have handled the recession relatively well. In this video, we will explore the reasons for Africa's resilience, the progress the continent has made, and the impact of the crisis as seen through the lens of two countries, Kenya and South Africa. Let's start with Africa's progress. Antoinette Sayeh, the director of IMF's African department, explains.
One key factor has been the considerable progress made by African countries, beginning in the late 1990s and certainly in the first decade of this century, in addressing their fiscal problems so that when the crisis did hit, despite the fact that many countries suffered from lower revenues as a result of the reduced demand for African exports. Even with that reduction in revenues, countries were able to sustain spending on key priorities, making space for additional expenditure in some cases to protect the poor from the impact of the crisis. So able to do that because the previous efforts at reform had borne fruit in more sustainable fiscal situation.
The private sector has played an important role in improving Africa's performance.
It's been a very encouraging feature of African economies, this new openness to the private sector and this more level playing field for foreign direct investment as well.
1 year ago, the IMF co-hosted a conference in Tanzania which called for a stronger partnership between IMF and Africa. This has led to a deeper relationship.
The Tanzania conference, as we called it, was a critical turning point in the relationship between the fund and its African member countries. I think a year since the conference, the fund was able to provide in 2009 financing for sub-Saharan Africa of $5 billion, 5 times the amount it was able to do a year earlier. So significant progress, I think, across the board, from provision of financing, reform of conditionality, our approach to debt and debt limits in fund-supported program, increasing the voice of African countries in the fund.
The efforts made during the Tanzania conference paid off. Now let's move to its neighbor, Kenya, and find out what impact the crisis had on its economy.
Kenya had been emerging from a deep political crisis when the global recession hit. Kenya was also faced with drought that meant significantly reduced availability of food for some 10 million people or so that faced the prospect of hunger.
Looking ahead, what are the main challenges facing Kenya?
The main challenge is to accelerate and deepen economic growth as a basis for reducing poverty in Kenya. And around that bigger challenge, of course, a number of issues around moving ahead with comprehensive reform program. The fund stands ready also to continue to provide support to Kenya's efforts at reform, technical assistance, policy advice, and should the government be interested, of course, to consider the provision of financing as well. And so we're looking forward to a continued deep dialogue and relationship with Kenya as it seeks to address what are formidable challenges in the months ahead.
Another country which was hard hit by the recession was South Africa.
The impact of the global crisis on demand for South African exports has meant that South Africa, in effect, went into a major recession. South Africa lost close to 1 million jobs, some 860,000 jobs in the course of the recession. Many of those jobs were in low-skilled and low-wage manufacturing, a sector that has been in some decline. So the challenge of employment creation for those that have lost their jobs, a large number of people in South Africa, is a major one.
With the global economy recovering and the strong partnership forged between the IMF and Africa, things are looking up. By boosting lending, expanding technical assistance, and offering policy advice, the IMF and Africa are working together to build the road to recovery and an even stronger Africa.